Hi, Year 11. This screencast is on a poem called Telephone Conversation. It is part of the Anthology C section of your English Literature Edexcel certificate. First of all, let's talk about the word theme. When we talk about the theme of a poem, we're talking about the subject of the poem and what we learn about that subject, and most importantly, what we think the poet wants us to take away from the poem regarding the theme. The theme of this poem can be answered by looking at this question. What does the poem say about the human experience, about motivation, or about human condition? A little bit about the poet. He was born in Nigeria in 1934. As of today, in 2013, he's still alive. Even from a very young age, he felt a real conflict between growing up in Africa and traditions and the pull between that and Western modernization. He's lived in Nigeria, the United States, and in England. He's also been in jail because of his political beliefs. He's a really interesting person. I encourage you to have a look and find out more about him. He's also the first African to ever win the Nobel Prize for Literature, and he won that in 1986. Before we look at the poem, I thought it would be important for you to make sure that you understand all of the language in the poem. I've chosen some examples of words here that you might not know. Pause this screen, have a look on the poem to find where the words are, and make sure that you're comfortable with the definitions. Okay, similarly, here are three more phrases that I thought that you might not be familiar with, so have a look at the poem and find these three. All right, the poet came to England as a young man in the 1950s. And the poem relates to this period, to the late 1950s. And at this point, there weren't any laws to prevent discrimination by landlords. So if a landlord didn't want to rent you a flat or a house based on your race, they were allowed to do so. Now, those laws do exist now, and so such events as are mentioned in this poem would not happen now. So in the poem, the poet is talking about his disappointment and anger about being discriminated against simply because he is African. So let's take a look at the poem. The price seemed reasonable. Location, indifferent. The landlady swore she lived off premises. Nothing remained but self-confession. Madam, I warned, I hate a wasted journey. I am African. Silence. Silence transmission of pressurized good breeding. Voice, when it came. Lipstick-coated, long gold-rolled cigarette holder pipped. Caught I was, foully. How dark? I had not misheard. Are you light or very dark? Button B, button A. Stench of rancid breath, of public hide-and-speak. Red booth, red pillar box, red double-tiered omnibus squelching tar. It was real. Shamed by ill-mannered silence, surrender pushed dumbfoundment to beg simplification. Considerate she was, varying the emphasis. Are you dark or very light? Revelation came. You mean like plain or milk chocolate? Her assent was clinical, crushing in its light impersonality. Rapidly, wavelength adjusted, I chose. West African sepia, and as an afterthought, down in my passport. Silence for spectroscopic flight of fancy, till truthfulness changed her accent hard on the mouthpiece. What's that? Conceding. Don't know what that is. Like brunette. Well, that's dark, isn't it? Not altogether. Facially I am brunette, but madam, you should see the rest of me. Palm of my hand, soles of my feet are peroxide blonde. Friction caused, foolishly, madame, by sitting down, has turned my bottom raven black. One moment, madame, sensing her receiver rearing on the thunderclap about my ears. Madame, I pleaded, wouldn't you rather see for yourself? So, on the next two slides, you'll see kind of a summary of the poem, and I've highlighted some of the important things about it. So we know the caller is interested in renting a house. The landlady reassures him that she doesn't live on the premises. Then he doesn't want to waste his journey, So he goes ahead and he's honest with her, and he tells her that he is African because he knows that this might make a difference. Now, there's a pun of the word indifferent, so have a look at that. And when she asks the caller, are you light or very dark? It's very interesting because to her, if he is light, she's more likely to rent the house to him. So she's obviously discriminating against him. The man then decides that he's not going to rent the house. Look at the line of the poem where it talks about rationalization. So he then decides, right, I'm going to play some word tricks on this woman. And so he describes her as he imagines her to be, because of course this is a telephone conversation, lipstick-coated, long gold rolled cigarette holder piped. And it seemed that the woman is wealthy and well-educated, but this is pretty ironic because he is actually the one who's more educated, less arrogant, and not impolite. Now, he's also very sarcastic towards the woman when he says that he's sepia and brunette. Both of them mean quite dark in color. And the poet is trying to say that racism is not fair in society. The Caucasian woman is only judging him on his appearance, even though, he sounds quite educated. The persona plays word tricks on the woman, and you could react to this as a reader by thinking that that's a bit rude. But it also shows that the Africans can be just as or even more educated than the white woman. Now, in the last part of the poem, the poet makes use of humor because the woman does not seem to understand what he's talking about. So he points out that perhaps she'd want to look at his whole body to see if it's entirely the same shade of black. And then, of course, he states that his bottom is raven black. Okay, the structure of the poem. As you can see, it doesn't look like any of the other poems in Anthology C. It's in one stanza. It's in free verse. You probably also notice the use of capital letters, short dramatic sentences. We have first-person point of view. Point of view, of course, is from the persona who is the caller. Now, the reason why the poem looks like this is because a telephone conversation is not planned. So there's a sense of random formation, which connects to the way in which a telephone conversation actually flows. 3 different things that I would like you to look at and have prepared for when you come into class next. So I'd like you to think about the tone of the poem. Which tone would you associate with this poem? Secondly, I'd like you to highlight all of the words that are associated with color. We have a semantic field, which is a category of words in this poem, all associated with color. So highlight those. And then finally, I'd like you to look for the alliteration, which is towards the end of the poem, and I'd like you to think about the effect of that alliteration. Now, of course, for the exam, you will need to connect this poem to other poems. So we know that this poem is mainly about prejudice and discrimination, but you could also say it's about how people learn hard lessons from their experience. So have a think about which other poems you could connect this poem to. Take a look at this former exam question. Explore how people are presented in telephone conversation and in Once Upon a Time. Support your answer with examples from the poems. And of course, both of these focus on prejudice. So this would be a good exam practice for you, is to try to do some thinking about how the people are presented. And of course, you're looking with the word how, you're looking for through the language and through the structure. And then you could answer this question. If you'd like to extend your learning, many of you are familiar with the website Edexcel. If you go to this link here, you'll have some analysis of the poem, so for some things for you to think about. And then also on our YouTube site, there are 2 videos that I've uploaded to the Anthology C playlist about this poem and about this poet. Thanks for listening.